The sky above was a lie. Izuku Midoriya knew this fact as intimately as he knew the erratic, nervous rhythm of his own heartbeat. He stood in the grand courtyard of the Arc Military Academy, his posture rigid, the stiff collar of his pristine, obsidian black commander's uniform pressing uncomfortably against his throat. He tilted his head back, staring up at the vast, curved expanse of the artificial ceiling. High above the sprawling, subterranean metropolis, panels of LED screens projected a brilliant, cloudless azure blue. It was a digital mimicry of a world Izuku had never touched, a world stolen from humanity decades ago by the mechanical terrors known as raptures. The Ark was humanity's last bastion, a sprawling, multi-tiered cage buried deep beneath the Earth's crust. It was a marvel of engineering, a testament to human survival. But to Izuku, the fake sky always felt a little too bright, the air always smelled faintly of recycled ozone and sterilized metal, and the walls, no matter how wide the city stretched, always felt like they were closing in. Around him, the courtyard was a sea of murmuring voices, proud parents, and freshly minted commanders celebrating their graduation. Laughter echoed off the marble pillars. Champagne glasses clinked. Yet, Izuku stood somewhat apart from his peers, an island of quiet anxiety amidst a sea of triumphant bravado. He didn't quite fit in. He never had. In the modern era of the Ark, being a commander was a physically demanding role. The surface was a toxic, irradiated wasteland teeming with mechanical monstrosities. To survive even a few minutes up there, commanders were usually subjected to intense biological augmentations and cybernetic enhancements before they ever stepped foot in the academy. These enhancements, colloquially referred to by the lower classes as quirks of engineering, granted enhanced stamina, rapid healing, reinforced skeletal structures, and sometimes even localized neural uplinks to process battlefield data. Izuku Midoriya had none of these. He was biologically, fundamentally, and painfully standard. He was what the academy instructors bluntly called a baseline, or worse, quirkless. When he was 4 years old, a military doctor had looked at his brain scans and physical aptitude tests, sighing heavily before turning to Izuku's mother, Inko. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Midoriya. His central nervous system simply isn't compatible with standard cyberneurological grafting. His body would reject the enhancements. He'll never survive the physical rigors of the Commander program." That day, the dream had shattered. Izuku had sat in his dimly lit bedroom, watching old, digitized pre-rapture vids of the legendary First Commanders, men like the golden-haired hero known only as All Might, who had led the first Nikke squads to secure the Ark's foundations, flashing a fearless smile even as the world burned around him. Izuku had pointed a trembling finger at the monitor, tears streaming down his face, and asked his mother, Can I be a hero too?" Inko had only cried and apologized. But apologies weren't what Izuku needed. He didn't give up. If his body couldn't be enhanced, he would enhance his mind. He devoured military history, tactical doctrines, rapture behavioral patterns, and, most importantly, every scrap of public data available on the Ark's ultimate weapons, the goddesses of victory. The Nikkes. He filled notebook after notebook with hyper-detailed sketches, theoretical tactical formations, and weapon synergy analyses. Hero analysis for the future, he called them. When it came time for the academy entrance exams, he failed the physical portion spectacularly. But his written exam? His tactical simulation scores? They broke the grading algorithm. He outmaneuvered instructor-level AI, completing surface retrieval scenarios with a 0% casualty rate, a feat previously thought impossible. The academy had no choice but to admit him. And now, 4 years later, the quirkless boy from the lower residential sectors was graduating at the absolute top of his class. Midoriya. Izuku jumped, tearing his gaze away from the fake sky. A shadow had fallen over him. Standing there was a man built like a dreadnought. He wore the high-collared uniform of a deputy chief, his broad shoulders easily parting the crowd of celebrating graduates. His sharp, angular face was set in a perpetual scowl, framed by impeccably styled dark hair. "Deputy Chief Anderson, sir," Izuku stammered, immediately snapping off a crisp, textbook salute. His heart hammered against his ribs. Anderson was a legend in the central government, a man who commanded immense respect and held the lives of thousands in his calloused hands. Anderson looked down at the scrawny, green-haired youth. His piercing gaze seemed to strip away the uniform, analyzing the fragile, unenhanced human beneath it. For a long moment, the older man said nothing. He just stared, making Izuku sweat under the scrutiny. "At ease, cadet," Anderson finally rumbled, his voice a deep baritone that carried over the ambient noise of the courtyard. "Or I should say, Commander Midoriya, your commission has been officially finalized by the central government." Izuku dropped his hand, his eyes widening. "Thank you, sir. I promise I won't let the Ark down. I'll do whatever it takes to reclaim the surface." Anderson didn't smile. If anything, the deep lines around his mouth tightened. "Words are wind, Midoriya. The surface doesn't care about your promises, and the Raptures certainly don't care about your test scores. I've reviewed your file. Top of the class in tactics, rock bottom in physical endurance. You're a liability in a firefight." Izuku flinched, looking down at his boots. "I know, sir. But I have strategies." "Strategies fall apart when a Tyrant-class Rapture drops a plasma barrage on your transport," Anderson interrupted bluntly. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick, sealed manila folder, holding it out. "But Central Command cannot ignore your simulation results. Your ability to read the battlefield is unprecedented. Therefore, you are being given an immediate field command. This is your squad assignment." Izuku's breath hitched. His hands trembled as he reached out and took the heavy folder. This was it. The moment he had dreamed of for his entire life. He was officially a commander. He was going to lead a squad of Nikks, the beautiful, tragic, mechanical angels of the battlefield. He was going to be a hero. "Before you open that, Midoriya, look at me," Anderson commanded, his tone dropping an octave, carrying a chilling gravity. Izuku snapped his head up, meeting Anderson's intense gaze. "You are young. You are idealistic. Your psychological profile is riddled with words like empathy, altruism, and self-sacrifice," Anderson said, stepping closer. "Those are admirable traits in a civilian. In a commander, they are a death sentence." Anderson leaned in, his voice barely a whisper, yet it roared in Izuku's ears. "Listen to me very carefully, Midoriya. The entities you are about to command are Nikks. They look human. They sound human. They will bleed, and they will cry. But you must never forget what they actually are: weapons. They are tools forged by the Ark to kill Raptures. Nothing more." Izuku's grip on the folder tightened, his knuckles turning white. He knew the doctrine. Every citizen of the Ark knew the doctrine. Nikks were cyborgs, human brains encased in mechanical bodies, stripped of their human rights. To the central government, they were disposable hardware. If a Nikk's leg was blown off, it was akin to a jammed rifle, an inconvenience, easily replaced. "Do not fraternize with them," Anderson continued, his eyes locked onto Izuku's. "Do not treat them as your equals. Do not risk your life to save theirs. If a Nikk is damaged beyond repair, you leave her behind. If she disobeys, you use your N9pH override to force compliance. If you hesitate because you think of them as human, you will die, and the Ark will lose a tactical asset. Do I make myself perfectly clear, Commander?" Izuku stared at the deputy chief. For a fleeting second, Izuku remembered the pre-rapture vids. He remembered All Might saving people with a smile, extending a hand to the weak, the broken, and the lost. He remembered the feeling of utter powerlessness when the doctor told him he was quirkless, that he was a broken tool with no value to society. Something flared in Izuku's emerald eyes. It wasn't defiance, exactly. It was a quiet, unshakable stubbornness. "I understand the Ark's doctrine, Deputy Chief," Izuku said, his voice surprisingly steady. He didn't agree to it, but he acknowledged it. Anderson studied him for a second longer, a complex emotion flickering in his stern eyes, perhaps a hint of sorrow, or perhaps just weariness. He stepped back. "Report to Outpost Command Sector 4. Your squad is waiting for you there. Survive your first mission, Midoriya." "That is an order." With a sharp pivot, Anderson walked away, disappearing back into the crowd of elites and government officials. Izuku stood alone for a moment, the weight of the folder heavy in his hands. He looked down at the classified seal. He didn't need to break it open right now. He needed to get moving. He tucked the folder firmly under his arm, adjusted his commander's cap, and began the long walk towards Sector 4. The journey through the Ark was a sensory overload, a stark contrast to the sterile, manicured grounds of the military academy. As Izuku descended through the transport elevators into the commercial and military hybrid zones, the pristine white marble gave way to neon-lit steel, hissing steam pipes, and the relentless, suffocating press of millions of people living on top of one another. Holographic advertisements blared from the walls, selling everything from synthetic nutrient paste to the latest, high-end cybernetic prosthetics for the wealthy. The streets were choked with foot traffic, merchants, laborers, off-duty soldiers, and government officials. And then, there were the Nicks. Izuku saw them everywhere, easily identifiable by their stunning, almost impossibly perfect appearances and the heavy, military-grade weaponry they slung over their shoulders like backpacks. Despite being the sole reason humanity hadn't been exterminated, they moved through the streets like ghosts, actively avoided by the citizens. As Izuku walked, he witnessed the reality of the Ark's doctrine firsthand. Near a supply depot, he saw a commander in a uniform identical to his own violently berating a Nikke. The girl, who looked no older than Izuku, with long blonde hair and a torn combat skirt, stood rigidly at attention, her eyes fixed forward, devoid of emotion. "You stupid piece of scrap!" the commander spat, kicking the heavy supply crate she was carrying. "You missed the extraction point by 2 whole minutes. Do you know how much danger you put me in? If your chassis wasn't so expensive, I'd have your brain wiped right now." "I apologize, master," the Nikke replied, her voice eerily monotone, a stark contrast to the violent trembling of her synthetic hands. "My left optical sensor was damaged by rapture fire. My depth perception was compromised. It will not happen again." "Damn right it won't. Carry the crate. And if you bleed oil on my boots again, I'm putting a bullet in your core myself." Izuku stopped in his tracks. His fists clenched so hard his short, blunt fingernails dug into his palms. A sickening wave of nausea washed over him. His legs twitched, the overwhelming urge to sprint over there and intervene, to shield the girl, to punch the arrogant commander in his face, flaring up in his chest. Meddling when you don't need to is the essence of being a hero. The thought echoed in his mind, a core philosophy he had built his life upon. He took a half-step forward, but he stopped. He was a newly minted commander. He had no authority here, no power to change the systemic abuse ingrained in the Ark's society. If he caused a scene now, he'd be stripped of his rank before he even met his squad. He couldn't save anyone if he was thrown back into the civilian sector. "I can't save her," Izuku thought, swallowing the bitter taste of bile in his throat. "But I can save the ones put in my care. I will never, ever treat my squad like that. Never." With renewed determination he pressed on, his eyes focused on the path ahead. He navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the military sector, moving past armories and maintenance bays that reeked of gun oil, burnt gunpowder, and the metallic tang of synthetic blood. Finally, he reached the corridor of Sector 4. At the end of the drab, gray hallway was a heavy, reinforced steel door bearing a digital plaque, Squad Vanguard Command Room. Izuku stopped in front of the door. Suddenly, the reality of the situation hit him like a physical blow. He was going to be their commander. Their lives would be in his hands. He was an 18-year-old kid with a notebook full of scribbles, no combat enhancements, and a habit of muttering when he got nervous. What if they hated him? What if they realized he was quirkless and refused to follow his orders? What if he made a tactical error and got them killed? His breathing hitched, quickening into a shallow, panicked rhythm. "Breathe, Izuku. Breathe," he told himself, slapping his own cheeks with both hands to snap out of the spiral. "You spent your whole life preparing for this. You know their specs. You know the tactics. You just need to be a leader. Be confident. Smile, like All Might." He forced his trembling lips into a wide, albeit slightly strained smile. He reached up, wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, and pressed his palm against the biometric scanner. The scanner beeped green. The heavy hydraulic doors hissed, parting down the middle and sliding open. Izuku stepped inside. Inside the command room, the atmosphere was thick enough to cut with a combat knife. The room itself was standard issue. A large holographic tactical table in the center, a few metallic lockers, a weapon maintenance bench, and a worn-out leather sofa in the corner. Occupying the room were 3 Nicks. Slouched deeply into the leather sofa, one leg draped lazily over the armrest, was a girl who looked like she would rather be anywhere else in the universe. She wore an oversized, bright yellow jacket over a form-fitting black combat suit, her short, voluminous orange hair framing a face locked in a scowl of profound annoyance. This was Anise, hiding, literally hiding, behind one of the metallic lockers, trying to make herself look as small as physically possible, was a petite girl. She had long, pale purple hair tied in twin tails, and she clutched a massive, terrifyingly large sniper cannon to her chest like a teddy bear. Her large eyes darted around the room, full of anxiety. This was Vesti, and finally, standing victoriously atop the tactical table in the center of the room, hands planted firmly on her hips, was a girl with sharp features, a jagged red mask covering her mouth, and a striking, asymmetrical white and black uniform. She had silver hair and an aura of intense, theatrical menace. This was Drake. "I'm telling you, this is a disaster," Anise was complaining loudly, throwing her head back against the sofa. "Do you know what I heard from the maintenance crew? They're giving us a rookie, fresh out of the academy. Probably some arrogant, rich kid snob whose parents bought him a titanium spine, and now he wants to play war hero on the surface. You Vesti squeaked from behind the locker, her voice barely louder than a mouse. "And maybe he'll be nice?" The last commander yelled a lot. I didn't like the yelling. "Nice? Vesti, commanders aren't nice," Anise snorted, rolling her eyes. "They're either tyrants who want to use us as meat shields, or they're creeps who look at us like we're exotic toys. Best case scenario, he's a coward who hides in the transport while we do all the work, and then takes the credit. I give him 3 days before he cries to central government for a transfer. Fools!" Drake suddenly shouted, throwing her head back and letting out a loud, echoing laugh that sounded completely forced. "Mwahaha! Let the new commander come. It matters not, for I, Drake, the ultimate villain of the Ark, shall bend him to my dark will. I will make him my minion. I will force him to authorize extra ration drops, and then I will distribute those rations to the orphans in the outer sectors, making them reliant on my sinister benevolence." "How fiendish!" Anise stared at Drake with a deadpan expression. "Drake. That's called charity." "It is not charity." Drake stomped her foot on the table, her mask shifting slightly. "It is a long-term psychological subjugation tactic. You lack the vision for true evil, Anise." "Whatever you say, edgelord," Anise sighed, rubbing her temples. "I just hope this new guy isn't completely insufferable. If he touches me, I'm breaking his fingers and blaming it on a rapture." It was at that exact moment the doors hissed open. The 3 Nicks froze. Anise sat up, her cynical sneer firmly in place, ready to glare daggers at whatever arrogant, cybernetically enhanced meathead strode through the door. Drake struck an imposing, villainous pose on the table. Vesti shrank further behind the locker, squeezing her eyes shut. The smoke cleared, and in stepped Izuku Midoriya. He didn't look like a commander. His uniform, despite being perfectly tailored, looked slightly too big for his modest, unenhanced frame. He had a mop of unruly, fluffy green hair, large, luminous emerald eyes, and a constellation of freckles scattered across his cheeks. He was clutching a burned, slightly battered notebook to his chest like a shield. He looked around the room, taking in the 3 heavily armed cyborgs. Then, he did something no commander in the history of the Ark had ever done upon meeting a squad of Nicks. He stepped forward, put his feet together, placed his hands sharply at his sides, and bowed. A perfect 90-degree, deeply respectful bow. Hello?" Izuku's voice rang out, slightly squeaky with nerves but vibrating with absolute, undeniable sincerity. "I am Izuku Midoriya. I have been assigned as your new commander. It is an absolute honor to meet you all, and I promise to do my very best to support you and ensure we all come home safe from every mission." Silence, utter, absolute, pin-drop silence descended upon the command room. Anise's jaw went slack. The cynical insult she had preloaded on her tongue completely dissolved. She blinked once, twice, staring at the green-haired boy whose upper half was still currently parallel to the floor. Is he bowing to us?" Drake, still standing on the table, slowly lowered her hands from her hips. The imposing aura completely vanished, replaced by profound confusion. He's polite? Is this a trick? A counter-villainous ploy? Vesti peeked out from behind the locker, her large eyes wide with shock. He said it's an honor to meet us. Izuku slowly straightened up, his face flushed red with embarrassment. He realized the silence had stretched on a bit too long. He nervously rubbed the back of his neck, offering a wobbly, nervous smile. I'm sorry. Was that too formal? I really admire the work you do. You're the ones protecting the Ark, after all. You're heroes. Heroes. The word hung in the air, heavy and alien. Nicks were called many things. Tools. Weapons. Scrap. Assets. Monsters. Never, ever heroes. Anise was the first to recover. She stood up from the sofa, crossing her arms, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. She walked a slow circle around Izuku, looking him up and down. He didn't have the bulky muscles of a physical enhancer. He didn't have the glowing optic implants of a neurolinker. He looked soft. Fragile. What kind of joke is this? Anise demanded, her voice sharp. Did Central Command run out of actual soldiers? What are your enhancements, kid? You look like a stiff breeze could break your spine. Izuku flinched slightly, but he didn't look away. I don't have any enhancements, Anise. I'm baseline human. Quirkless, I guess you could say. Anise stopped in her tracks, her eyes widening in disbelief. You're unenhanced? And they made you a commander? Are they trying to get us killed? If you go up to the surface, the atmospheric pressure changes alone will make you puke your guts out, let alone trying to run from a rapture. I know I'm weak physically, Izuku said, his tone shifting. The nervousness faded, replaced by a sudden, intense focus that took Anise off guard. He stepped forward, opening his battered notebook. But I didn't come here to outrun raptures. I came here to outthink them. And to do that, I need to understand my team. Izuku turned his gaze to the girl on the table. Drake, right? Drake stiffened, puffing out her chest. That is correct. I am Drake, the supreme villain. Tremble before your firepower is incredible, Izuku interrupted, his eyes gleaming as he looked at the massive shotgun strapped to her back. He began muttering at a rapid-fire pace, flipping through his notebook. You utilize a custom SG model close-quarters ballistic cannon. Judging by your frame, your recoil compensators are heavily concentrated in your shoulders and hips, allowing for rapid-fire bursts without losing mobility. However, because you fight at close range, you draw a massive amount of aggro. You need a commander who can predict enemy movement patterns so you don't get flanked, right? Drake stood frozen, her mouth slightly open beneath her mask. Yes? I mean, no. I need no one. I am a lone wolf of evil. Izuku smiled warmly. Well, I look forward to supporting your evil from the back line. Just make sure you don't push too far ahead without cover. He turned away from the flustered Drake and walked toward the locker. Vesti squeaked and tried to press herself flat against the metal, terrified of the impending scolding. Commanders hated timid Nicks, but Izuku didn't yell. He stopped a few feet away, respecting her personal space. He knelt down slightly so he was at eye level with her. You're Vesti, Izuku said softly, his voice gentle. Vesti gave a microscopic nod, her eyes welling with tears. I am sorry. I'm small, and I get scared. I'm not a good Nick. No, don't say that, Izuku said firmly, yet kindly. He tapped a specific page in his notebook. I read your file, Vesti. You wield a heavily modified burst rocket launcher. The explosive yield you can generate is phenomenal. You have the highest destructive potential in this entire sector. Vesti blinked away a tear, looking at him in confusion. I do? You do, Izuku affirmed, giving her a bright, blinding smile. It's okay to be scared. I get scared all the time. Being brave doesn't mean you aren't afraid. It means you act anyway, and with your power, you can protect everyone in this room. I know you can. I believe in you. Vesti stared at the boy. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever told her it was okay to be afraid. She felt a strange, warm feeling blooming in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced since she was human. A faint blush crept across her cheeks, and she slowly lowered her weapon just an inch. Why, you believe in me? I do, Izuku promised. He stood up and finally turned back to Anise, who was staring at him as if he had grown a second head. The cynical Nick was completely at a loss for words. This kid wasn't a tyrant. He wasn't a creep. He wasn't even a coward. He was something else entirely. Anise, Izuku said, closing his notebook and tucking it under his arm. You use an RL-class grenade launcher, specializing in mid-range area denial and support. You're the linchpin that holds the front and back lines together. But beyond that, Izuku paused, his emerald eyes meeting Anise's guarded gaze. He remembered the Nick he saw in the hallway being abused. He remembered Anderson's cold, calculating orders. Beyond your weapons, Izuku continued, his voice dropping into a solemn, fiercely earnest register. I want to know about you. All of you. I want to know what foods you like. I want to know what you do for fun. I want to know how you prefer to rest after a mission. Anise felt a cold sweat break out on the back of her neck. She took a step back, her defensive walls slamming back into place. Whoa, back up. What kind of psychological game is this? Did Command send you in here to psychoanalyze us? We're Nick's, kid. We don't need a therapist. We need orders. It's not a game, Izuku said, taking a step forward. He didn't look away. The Ark might view you as weapons. Deputy Chief Anderson told me exactly what the doctrine is. He told me to treat you like tools. The three Nicks stiffened. There it was. The inevitable drop of the hammer. Anise's lips curled into a bitter sneer. And there's the truth. So why the act, Midoriya? Why pretend to care? Izuku's expression didn't harden. Instead, it softened with a profound, heartbreaking empathy. He raised his right hand and placed it firmly over his own heart. Because I refuse to accept that doctrine, Izuku declared, his voice ringing through the command room with the conviction of a true hero. I know what it feels like to be told you're broken. I know what it feels like to be told you have no value to society. I am quirkless. To the military brass, I'm just as disposable as they think you are. He looked at Anise, then at Vesti, and finally at Drake. I didn't become a commander to command weapons, Izuku said, a determined smile breaking across his face. I became a commander to lead a team. You aren't tools to me. You're my partners, and as long as I am your commander, I swear on my life, I will never leave any of you behind. We fight together, and we survive together. The silence returned to the room, but this time, it wasn't heavy with tension. It was thick with disbelief, awe, and an emotion none of the Nicks dared to name. Hope. Anise stared at the fragile, unenhanced, green-haired kid. He was smiling at her, offering his hand in a gesture of pure, unadulterated friendship. She looked at his hand, then back up to his eyes. They were completely devoid of deceit. He's insane, Anise thought, her mechanical heart giving a strange, irregular thump. He's completely, wonderfully insane. He's going to get himself killed. You're an idiot, Commander, Anise finally sighed, shaking her head. But the harsh, cynical edge had vanished from her voice. She slowly reached out and grasped his hand, giving it a firm shake. A complete idiot. But I guess we've had worse. Ha! The fool has willingly offered his hand to a villain. Drake crowed from the table, though she was furiously blushing behind her mask, thrilled at the prospect of having a commander who actually praised her. I accept your servitude, Midoriya. Together, we shall conquer the surface. Vesti stepped out from behind the locker, shuffling her feet. She looked up at Izuku through her bangs, her cheeks flushed pink. See, Commander Midoriya? I like strawberry cake, if you were wondering about foods. Izuku's smile widened until it hurt his cheeks. He quickly flipped open his notebook, pulling a pen from his breast pocket. Strawberry cake. Got it. I'll see if I can requisition some ingredients to bake one for our first victory. The three Nicks watched him furiously scribble in his notebook. He was a quirkless human, frail, anxious, and deeply weird. He had zero combat power, and his tactical genius was paired with a bleeding heart that directly defied the entire socio-political structure of the Ark. But as Izuku Midoriya looked up from his notes, his eyes shining with pure, heroic determination, Squad Vanguard realized something profound. For the first time in their mechanical lives, they weren't just weapons. They were a team. "All right, Vanguard," Izuku said, snapping the notebook shut, the air around him shifting from awkward teenager to a focused, brilliant tactician. "Let's review the combat logs. Our first surface expedition is tomorrow. I have a few ideas on how we can improve our burst rotation efficiency by 40%. Gather round," Anise groaned, though a faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Drake leaped off the table, dramatically cracking her knuckles. Vesti hurried over, standing close to Izuku's side, feeling a strange, new sensation radiating from the boy. Safety. The Ark was a dark, oppressive cage, and the surface was a mechanical hellscape. But as Izuku began to map out their strategy, muttering excitedly and asking for their input, a spark had been lit in Sector 4. A spark of humanity, of heroism, that the Raptures, and the Ark itself, were not prepared for. To Izuku Midoriya, the world was a puzzle made of a million moving pieces. Where others saw chaos, he saw patterns. Where others saw impenetrable armor, he saw stress points and structural flaws. And where others saw unfeeling, mechanical weapons, he saw three very confused, very traumatized girls who had no idea what to make of him. The command room of Squad Vanguard was quiet, save for the low, rhythmic thrum of the Ark's massive ventilation turbines vibrating through the reinforced steel walls. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a faint, sterile hum, casting stark shadows across the tactical holotable situated in the center of the room. Izuku sat on a heavy metal stool at the head of the table. In front of him lay a brand new, pristine notebook. The cover was a matte, durable synthetic leather, a stark contrast to the scorched and battered civilian notebooks he had filled during his academy days. With a meticulous, almost reverent care, he uncapped his pen and pressed the nib to the crisp, unblemished first page. In neat, blocky handwriting he wrote, "Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 1, Nikke's Squad Vanguard." He underlined the word hero twice. It was a silent rebellion, a private vow made against the cold, utilitarian doctrine of the central government. Izuku looked up from the page. Standing on the opposite side of the holotable, shifting awkwardly in their heavy combat gear, were Anise, Vesti, and Drake. They had been standing there for nearly 5 minutes, watching him write in total silence. The tension in the room was palpable, thick and suffocating. They were waiting for the other shoe to drop. In the Ark, a commander calling a squad to the tactical table meant one of three things: a suicide mission briefing, a grueling disciplinary dressing down, or a cruel, degrading display of authority to remind the Nikkes of their place at the bottom of the societal hierarchy. Anise had her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her weight shifted onto one hip. Her eyes were narrowed, tracking Izuku's every micro-movement like a cornered animal waiting for a strike. Next to her, Vesti was shivering slightly, her fingers white-knuckled around the strap of her massive burst rocket launcher, her gaze firmly glued to the scuff marks on the steel floor. Even Drake, who had maintained her theatrical, imposing posture, looked profoundly uncomfortable, her masked face twitching as she struggled to maintain her villainous aura in the face of this bizarre, quiet domesticity. Izuku began, tapping the end of his pen against his chin. He offered them a bright, disarming smile. "You guys don't have to stand at attention. Please have a seat. There are chairs right there." Anise blinked, her cynical sneer faltering for a fraction of a second. "Sit? Yeah." Izuku nodded enthusiastically, gesturing to the heavy, rolling tactical chairs pushed against the far wall. "We're going to be here for a little bit, and that gear looks incredibly heavy. It's bad for your posture to lock your knees on a hard steel deck for prolonged periods. Please, make yourselves comfortable." The three Nikkes exchanged glances. This was a trap. It had to be a trap. "I prefer to stand," Anise said flatly, her tone dripping with suspicion. "Just give us the briefing, Commander. What desolate, rapture-infested ruin is Central Command sending us to die in tomorrow?" Izuku's smile softened into something incredibly patient. He didn't take the bait. He didn't snap at her for insubordination. He just pulled the notebook closer to him. "We'll get to the mission parameters in a little while, Anise," Izuku said gently. "But before I can formulate a proper tactical rotation, I need to complete my preliminary analysis. The Academy files on Squad Vanguard are, well, they're severely lacking. Drake suddenly leaned forward, slamming her hands onto the hollow table, a manic glint in her eyes. Lacking? Did they fail to document my glorious reign of terror? I assure you, Commander, my files should be steeped in the blood of my enemies and the tears of those who crossed me. Well, your combat efficiency ratings are spectacular, Drake, Izuku said, flipping to a page labeled Subject, Drake. But the files only list raw data. Output percentages, recoil matrices, heat sink limitations. They tell me what your weapons do, but they don't tell me how you fight. So, consider this an interview. An interview? Vesti squeaked softly, finally looking up from the floor. Exactly. Izuku's eyes lit up, the familiar, obsessive spark of his analytical mind taking over. He pointed his pen at Anise. Let's start with you, Anise. You operate an RL-class grenade launcher. The standard Academy doctrine dictates that RL units should maintain a static rearguard position to provide covering fire. But when I cross-reference your engagement logs, I notice your firing arc is incredibly shallow, and you take significantly more kinetic damage than a standard backliner. Why is that? Anise bristled, her jaw tightening. She prepared herself for the reprimand. Because standard doctrine is garbage, she snapped defensively. If I sit in the back, the burst spread is too wide to cover the vanguard. I push up to the midline so my blasts can stagger the Raptures right before they engage in melee. Yeah, I take some shrapnel, but it keeps the front line from getting overrun. If you want to write me up for breaking formation, go ahead. Instead of yelling, Izuku's eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. He furiously began scribbling in his notebook, a low, rapid-fire muttering spilling from his lips. Incredible. Sacrificing personal safety for optimized crowd control. By pushing the midline, she effectively shortens the travel time of the explosive payload, reducing the enemy's dodge window. But that puts immense strain on her chassis. If I adjust the squad's V formation into a staggered echelon, I can give her a blind spot buffer. Anise stared at him, dumbfounded. Are you writing that down? This is brilliant, Anise. Izuku beamed, looking up from his notes, his face flushed with genuine excitement. You instinctively formulated a high-risk, high-reward tactical flex, but taking that shrapnel damage isn't sustainable. If we shift Drake 5 meters to your left during a push, her shotgun spread will create a localized kinetic shield, deflecting the shrapnel while you reload. It's brilliant. What about your weapon's grip? Is it comfortable? Anise felt her brain short-circuit. What? Your weapon's grip, Izuku repeated earnestly. You're firing heavy ordnance at a shallow angle. The recoil must be torquing your wrists terribly. Do you prefer a vertical foregrip, or an angled one? I can submit a requisition form to the armory to have it customized so you don't develop microfractures in your synthetic joints. The silence returned. Anise stared at him as if he had just asked her what color the sky tasted like. You want to requisition a custom grip, for my comfort? Anise asked, her voice losing all its cynical edge, replaced by a hollow, raw confusion. Of course, Izuku said, tilting his head slightly, genuinely confused by her reaction. You can't fight at your best if your equipment is hurting you. He didn't wait for her to recover before turning his radiant, terrifyingly sincere attention back to his notebook. Okay, moving on. What are your hobbies, Anise? What do you like to do when you're off duty? Anise snapped out of her stupor. The sheer absurdity of the question hit her like a physical blow. The confusion rapidly morphed into a defensive, simmering anger. This was a joke. It had to be a psychological game. Hobbies? Anise laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the steel walls. Are you kidding me right now? Hobbies? She pushed off the table, stalking around it until she was standing just inches from Izuku. She loomed over him, using her height and her heavy armor to intimidate the scrawny, quirkless boy. Listen to me, Commander, Anise hissed, her voice venomous, dripping with years of buried trauma and systemic abuse. I don't know what kind of utopian, sunshine and rainbows garbage they fed you at the academy, but let me wake you up. We are Nicks. We don't have hobbies. We don't get comfort. When we're not on the surface getting torn apart by mechanical monstrosities, we're down here, locked in this damp sector, waiting for the next order to go die, Vesti whimpered, shrinking back against the lockers. Drake watched in silence, her fists clenched. Anise leaned in closer, her glowing eyes burning into Izuku's emerald ones. You want to know what I do for fun? I sleep. I sleep so I don't have to think about the fact that my life belongs to a government that views me as a disposable battery. So drop the nice guy act. It's sickening. If you try to play hero out there with us, treating us like we're human beings on a summer camp retreat, you are going to get yourself killed. And frankly, I don't want your blood on my conscience. The room held its breath. Anise had crossed the line. Insurrection. Insubordination. Any other commander would have immediately activated her NIMPH, the neural inhibitors installed in all Nicks, forcing her to her knees in agonizing, paralyzing pain as punishment for raising her voice to a human. Izuku didn't reach for a control terminal. He didn't flinch away. He sat perfectly still, absorbing the full brunt of Anise's anger, her pain, and her desperate cynicism. He looked deeply into her eyes, seeing past the aggressive posturing to the terrified, exhausted girl hiding underneath the armor. Slowly Izuku closed his notebook. The soft thud of the covers shutting seemed deafening in the quiet room. I'm not acting, Anise, Izuku said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight, a heavy, unshakable gravity that made Anise's breath hitch. He looked up at her, his expression utterly devoid of fear or anger. There was only a fierce, burning empathy. I know what the Ark thinks of you, Izuku said, his voice steady. Deputy Chief Anderson made it perfectly clear to me before I came here. He told me you were weapons. He told me to treat you like tools. He told me that if you get damaged, I should leave you behind. Anise swallowed hard, stepping back a half-inch. Then you know. I know what the doctrine is, Izuku corrected, his eyes flashing with a sudden, intense green fire. But I don't accept it. Just because the world tells you that you're worthless, just because the people in power look at you and see a broken machine, doesn't make it true. Izuku stood up from his stool. He was shorter than Anise, much smaller in stature, yet in that moment, he seemed to cast a shadow that enveloped the entire room. I grew up being told I was less than human because I didn't have enhancements, Izuku said, his voice trembling slightly with the ghost of old wounds, but his gaze never wavered. I was told I was useless, a burden. I know what it's like to be looked at like you're just scrap. But a true hero, a real hero, doesn't let society dictate their worth. A hero is someone who meddles when they don't need to. A hero is someone who saves people, not because it's their job, but because it's the right thing to do. He took a step toward Anise. She didn't retreat. She found herself paralyzed, completely captivated by the raw, bleeding sincerity radiating from this strange boy. I am not here to use you, Anise, Izuku vowed, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. I am not here to order you to die. You are not tools to me. You are my team. You are my partners, and to me, you are all heroes. I ask about your comfort and your hobbies because you are human beings, and you deserve to be treated with dignity. If playing the nice guy gets me killed, then I'll die standing by my principles. But I promise you, I'm going to fight with everything I have to make sure none of us die at all. Anise stared at him. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The cynical fortress she had spent years building around her heart had just been struck by a bunker-busting round of pure, unadulterated compassion. She felt a painful, burning sensation in the back of her throat, and she realized, with a sense of rising panic, that she was dangerously close to crying. She quickly looked away, running a hand through her orange hair, trying to scrub the emotion from her face. You're an idiot. You're completely delusional, Commander. But she didn't sound angry anymore. She sounded defeated. Defeated by kindness. Suddenly, a loud, dramatic scoff shattered the heavy emotional atmosphere. Bah! What a sickening display of camaraderie! Izuku and Anise turned. Drake had leapt off the table and was stalking toward them, her cape billowing behind her despite the lack of wind in the enclosed room. She pointed a black-gloved finger directly at Izuku's face. You claim to be a hero, Midoriya? Drake declared, her voice booming. You claim you wish to protect us? Foolish. You have left yourself completely exposed to the machinations of a true supervillain. Before Izuku could react, Drake lunged forward with lightning speed. Her hand blurred, and in a fraction of a second, she snatched Izuku's pen right off the notebook. She leapt backward, holding the standard-issue plastic pen high in the air as if it were the Holy Grail. Mwahaha! Drake threw her head back, unleashing her signature, theatrical villain laugh. Behold! While you were distracted by your pathetic emotional bonding, I have committed the ultimate act of thievery. I have stolen your writing implement. Now you are powerless to take your precious notes. Your tactical genius is thwarted. How does it feel, hero, to be completely dismantled by the supreme villain of the arc? Anise face-bound so hard the smack echoed. Drake, please. Not now. Vesti peeked over the table. Drake, that's just a pen. It is a symbol of his authority. Drake countered, puffing out her chest, reveling in her own perceived malevolence. Without it, he cannot assign duties. He cannot fill out requisition forms. I have brought the bureaucratic machine of Squad Vanguard to its knees. Izuku stood frozen for a moment, blinking at the silver-haired Nikke. Then, slowly, a massive, brilliant smile broke across his face. Wow, Drake, thank you so much! Izuku beamed, clasping his hands together in genuine gratitude. Drake's triumphant laugh cut off with a choked squeak. She lowered the pen, staring at him through the eye holes of her mask. What? I was actually just about to ask if one of you could throw that away for me, Izuku explained happily, pointing at the pen in her hand. The ink cartridge was completely dry. I was pressing so hard on the paper during Anisa's combat analysis that my hand was starting to cramp. But you noticed it was out of ink and took it away before I could strain my wrist. That was incredibly observant and thoughtful of you, Drake. Thank you? Drake stiffened as rigid as a board. A bright, furious blush exploded across her cheeks, visible even above the rim of her jagged mask. I didn't. It wasn't. To realize my pen was out of ink from all the way across the table? Izuku continued, his eyes shining with awe. Your visual acuity must be off the charts, and to disguise your helpfulness as a villainous act so I wouldn't feel bad about needing help. You're amazing, Drake. I am not helpful. Drake shrieked, clutching the dead pen to her chest as she backed away, completely flustered. I am evil. I am the darkness. I merely stole your garbage to clutter my own locker. Yes, I am hoarding trash to create a foul odor. It is psychological warfare. Well, thank you for your psychological warfare, Izuku said, bowing his head slightly, trying hard to suppress a chuckle. It really saved my hand. Drake let out a high-pitched sound of pure frustration, spinning around and stomping over to the lockers. She yanked hers open, gently placed the dead pen on the top shelf as if it were a prize trophy, and slammed the doors shut, muttering to herself about how no one respected true villainy anymore. Anise watched the exchange, utterly bewildered. She looked at Drake, then at Izuku, and a sudden, unexpected snort escaped her lips. She clamped a hand over her mouth, but it was too late. A genuine, bubbling laugh broke through her cynical exterior. You completely broke her, Anise giggled, shaking her head. I've never seen anyone derail Drake's edgelord routine that fast. Izuku smiled sheepishly, pulling a spare pen from the breast pocket of his uniform. I really did need a new pen. Anyway. Vesti? The sudden shift of attention made the petite Nikke jump. Vesti squeaked, instinctively pulling her massive sniper cannon up to hide the lower half of her face. Why yes. Commander? Izuku walked around the table, approaching her with slow, deliberate steps so as not to startle her further. He stopped a respectful distance away and knelt down on one knee, bringing himself slightly lower than her eye level. It was a subtle psychological trick to make himself appear completely non-threatening. I know it's a lot to process, Izuku said softly, his tone completely different from the energetic fanba who had analyzed Drake, or the fierce idealist who had confronted Anise. He spoke to Vesti like a gentle older brother. But I really meant what I said earlier. You have incredible power. But power is a heavy burden to carry, especially when you feel like you have to carry it alone. Vesti looked down at him, her large, timid eyes shimmering. So, if you don't mind, Izuku continued, opening his notebook again. Could you tell me a little bit about how your burst rockets feed into the chamber? I noticed in your file that your reload speed drops by 15% after sustained fire. Does the barrel overheat, or is the feed mechanism jamming due to the sheer size of the munitions? Vesti blinked. He wasn't asking her to be brave. He wasn't yelling at her for being quiet. He was just asking for her expertise. He was treating her like a professional. Slowly, tentatively, Vesti lowered her weapon an inch. It's the heatsink, Commander. The rockets are custom-made. They have a high incendiary payload. When I fire more than 3 in a row, the chamber expands from the heat, and the next shell gets stuck. Thermal expansion. Izuku muttered, furiously scribbling the information down. Of course. If the chamber tolerances are too tight, the heat will cause friction on the casing. Vesti, that's brilliant insight. Have you ever tried applying a micro-layer of synthetic cryogel to the casings before loading them? Vesti's eyes widened. See cryogel? No. The armory said it was a waste of resources on a crybaby like me. Izuku's hand stopped writing. For a fraction of a second, a dark, terrible anger flashed across his face. Anger at whoever had dared to say that to her. But he quickly banished it, replacing it with a warm, encouraging smile. Well, the armory is wrong, Izuku said firmly. Tomorrow morning, I'm personally marching down to logistics and authorizing a steady supply of cryogel for your munitions. We're going to get that reload speed up. You're going to be unstoppable, Vesti. Vesti felt a tear slip down her cheek, but this time, it wasn't out of fear. It was a profound sense of relief. She nodded vigorously, a tiny, tentative smile gracing her lips. Thank you, Commander Midoriya. Izuku stood up, clapping his hands together. The atmosphere in the room had completely shifted. The suffocating tension was gone, replaced by a strange, chaotic, but undeniable sense of unity. All right, Izuku announced, turning on the holographic table. A blue, three-dimensional map of a ruined surface city flickered to life, illuminating their faces in a cool glow. Now that I have a better understanding of how you all operate, let's talk about tomorrow's mission. We're deploying to Sector 7G, a ruined commercial district. Our objective is data retrieval from a downed Ark transport. Anise stepped up to the table, leaning over the map. 7G is a hotspot. Lots of verticality. Perfect ambush territory for flying raptures. Exactly, Izuku nodded, tapping a few commands into the console. Blue holographic avatars of the 3 Nikkes appeared on the map. Which is why standard V formation won't work. We'd be sitting ducks from above. So, we're going to try something new. I call it the plus ultra rotation. Drake sauntered over, peering at the map. Plus ultra? What does that mean? Is it a code word for total annihilation? It means go beyond, Izuku smiled. He pointed to the holographic avatars. Anise, you're not going to be sitting in the back. I want you right in the center, acting as the pivot point. Drake, you're going to take the vanguard, but you're not pushing in a straight line. You're going to sweep left to right in a pendulum motion. You'll draw the aggro, but because you're constantly moving laterally, their targeting algorithms will struggle to lock on. A pendulum of doom. Drake cackled. I love it. And Vesti, Izuku pointed to a high vantage point on the map. You're going to take the high ground. But you're not going to wait for them to cluster. With the cryogel, your reload speed will allow you to lay down a continuous barrage. You aren't just shooting enemies. You're going to use your explosions to dictate where the raptures are allowed to move. You're going to herd them right into Drake's shotgun spread. Anise stared at the holographic simulation running on the table. The tactical logic was sound. No, it was more than sound. It was a masterpiece. It utilized their strengths flawlessly while actively covering their weaknesses. But more importantly, it was a strategy built on trust. It required them to rely on one another completely. She looked up from the glowing blue light of the table, studying the boy who had engineered it. He was currently muttering to himself again, double-checking the blast radiuses on his notepad. He was fragile. He was unenhanced. He was ridiculously naive. But as Anise looked at him, she felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation settling in her chest. She had survived many commanders. She had hated them, feared them, and outlived them. But Izuku Midoriya was the first commander she felt she actually wanted to follow. "All right, Midoriya," Anise said, crossing her arms, but this time, there was a genuine smirk on her face. "You talk a big game. Let's see if this plus ultra garbage actually works tomorrow." "It will," Izuku promised, looking at the three of them with a fierce, unwavering confidence. "Because I have the best squad in the Arkansas." The meeting concluded shortly after. As the three Nicks filed out of the command room to perform their nightly maintenance, Izuku remained behind at the hollow table. He sat back down on his stool, pulling his notebook close. He turned to a fresh page. Picking up a new pen, he began to write, detailing everything he had learned today. Not just the weapon specs, but the way Anise used sarcasm as a shield, the way Drake desperately wanted to help people while pretending to be evil, and the way Vesti needed just a little bit of encouragement to unleash her true potential. As he wrote, he realized that Anderson was right about one thing. The surface was a meat grinder. It was a place of death and mechanical terror. But as Izuku closed his notebook for the night, tracing the words hero analysis with his thumb, he knew they were going to survive. They weren't just going to survive, they were going to win. Because they weren't weapons anymore, they were heroes. And Izuku Midoriya was going to make sure the whole world knew it. The ascent to the surface was a grueling, agonizing crawl through the belly of the earth. Izuku Midoriya sat strapped into the command seat of a light tactical rover, LTR, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. The rover was secured to the deck of the Ark's massive, primary freight elevator, a colossal platform of reinforced steel and hydraulic pistons that carried humanity's weapons from the subterranean cage up into the wasteland. The noise was deafening. The grinding of gears the size of buildings, the screech of metal fatigue, and the relentless, rhythmic thud-thud-thud of the locking mechanisms echoed in the cavernous shaft. But worse than the noise was the pressure. As the elevator climbed past the habitable zones of the Ark and entered the quarantine layers, the atmospheric pressure began to fluctuate violently. For a cybernetically enhanced commander, this was a minor discomfort, easily filtered out by inner-ear gyroscopics and reinforced vascular systems. For Izuku, a baseline human, it was torture. His ears popped painfully, a high-pitched ringing drilling into his skull. His stomach churned with violent nausea, and a cold sweat plastered his unruly green hair to his forehead. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing himself to take slow, measured breaths. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. "You can do this. You have to do this. Hey. You look like you're about to hurl." Izuku cracked one eye open. Anise was leaning against the reinforced roll cage of the rover, her arms crossed over her chest. Despite the violent shaking of the elevator, she stood perfectly balanced, her magnetic boot soles keeping her anchored. Her bright yellow jacket fluttered in the updraft, and though her tone was laced with its usual dry cynicism, there was a faint, unmistakable glimmer of concern in her eyes. I'm okay," Izuku gasped out, forcing a weak smile. He unclipped his canteen with a trembling hand and took a small sip of water. "Just acclimating to the barometric shift. I read that the surface atmosphere is roughly 15% thinner than the Ark's simulated environment. Reading about it and feeling it are two different things, kid," Anise sighed, shaking her head. "I told you last night, the surface isn't a simulation. The air up here is toxic, the ground is laced with residual radiation, and everything moving wants to kill us. If you need to stay in the rover and lock the hermetic seals, do it. We won't judge you much." "I am staying in the rover," Izuku said, adjusting the heavy, multi-screen tactical console bolted in front of him. "But I'm not locking the seals. I need unhindered visual and audio feeds. I can't command you properly through a delayed camera uplink." "Fools!" Drake's voice boomed over the localized comms, echoing off the elevator shaft. She was standing at the very edge of the platform, her cape billowing wildly around her as she stared up at the approaching blast doors. "Let the toxic winds howl. Let the radiation burn. It will only serve to fuel my dark, unstoppable power. The surface shall tremble before the might of Drake, the ultimate villain." Vesti, who was sitting huddled on the rear bumper of the rover, clutched her rocket launcher tightly. She looked up at Drake, then over at Izuku. "See, Commander, are you sure the cryogel will work? I loaded the magazines this morning, but the armory tech laughed at me." Izuku's nausea momentarily vanished, replaced by a surge of protective instinct. He unbuckled his harness, ignoring the protesting scream of his stomach, and leaned out of the rover. "Vesti, look at me." The timid girl looked up, her large purple eyes meeting his. "The thermodynamic principles are absolute," Izuku said, his voice steady and radiating confidence. "The armory techs are mechanics, not battlefield tacticians. The cryogel will mitigate the thermal expansion of your launch chamber by exactly 18.4%. It will work. You will work. Trust me." Vesti's grip on her weapon relaxed slightly. A small, resolute nod bobbed her head. "Oh, okay. I trust you." A massive, mechanical klaxon shattered the air, blaring 3 times. The red emergency lights lining the elevator shaft shifted to a blinding, fluorescent white. Approaching surface level. "Disengaging quarantine locks. May the goddess of victory smile upon you." The automated voice of the Ark's central AI was entirely devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the thundering heartbeat pounding in Izuku's chest. The massive steel blast doors far above them began to slowly groan open, parting like the maw of a colossal beast. A shaft of light pierced the gloom. But it wasn't the warm, golden sunlight of Izuku's pre-rapture history books. It was a sickly, pale gray, filtered through choked layers of ash and industrial smog. The elevator locked into place with a bone-rattling crash. The gates dropped. The surface. Izuku slowly stood up in the rover, resting his hands on the roll cage, utterly spellbound by the sheer scale of the devastation before him. They had emerged on the outskirts of what used to be a sprawling metropolis. The records called it Sector 7G, but the old, rusted street signs barely hanging onto warped poles read Muzurifu. It was a graveyard of human ambition. Skyscraper skeletons clawed at the oppressive sky, their glass facades long shattered, their steel bones wrapped in aggressive, mutated vines. The streets were rivers of cracked asphalt, and rusted husks of civilian vehicles, and the silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the mournful howl of the wind and the distant, unsettling sound of grinding metal. To Izuku's right, attached to the side of a half-collapsed building, was a massive, faded billboard. The paint was peeling, scarred by plasma burns, but Izuku could still make out the image. It was a man with blonde hair, wearing a bright costume, pointing a finger outward with a massive, fearless smile. The text beneath it was illegible, but the imagery struck a deep chord within Izuku's heart. A hero from the old world, Izuku thought, a profound sense of melancholy washing over him. They fought to protect this place. Now, it's our turn to take it back. All right, eyes up, Vanguard, Anisa's voice crackled over the comms, instantly snapping Izuku back to reality. She had unslung her grenade launcher, her posture shifting from lazy cynicism to hyperlethal focus. We're in Rapture territory now. Midoriya, run the localized scan. Izuku dropped back into his seat, his fingers flying across the tactical console. He activated the rover's sensory array. The screen bloomed into a topographic map of the ruined city blocks ahead. Booting up scans now, Izuku reported, his voice slipping into its crisp, professional cadence. Atmospheric interference is high. Lots of metallic debris scattering the radar. Our objective is an ARC transport down 3 clicks north, deep within the commercial district. We move in a staggered formation. Drake, take the point. Keep your sweeps wide. Anise, 30 meters back, hold the center line. Vesti, take the high ground along the ruined monorail track to our right. I'll trail Anise in the rover. Moving out, Drake declared, racking the slide of her massive shotgun with a satisfying CHK. She bounded forward, her cybernetic legs propelling her over rusted cars with terrifying grace. Vesti didn't say a word, but she leaped upward, her boosters flaring as she landed softly on the rusted beams of the elevated train tracks, her sniper rocket launcher tracking the streets below. Anise fell into step ahead of Izuku's slowly rolling rover. She glanced back at him, her eyes flicking to the dark circles under his eyes. Keep your head on a swivel, kid. Up here, death doesn't knock. The squad moved through the ruins for 20 agonizingly tense minutes. The tactical screen in front of Izuku remained clear, but the hair on his arms stood on end. The geometry of the city was a tactical nightmare. Too many blind alleys, Too many vertical drops, too many places for a machine to hide. Then, the rover's proximity alarm chimed. A soft, rhythmic ping. 1 red dot appeared on the radar. Then 3. Then 10. Contact, Izuku said sharply, his hands gripping the edges of his console. Grid reference 4 alpha. Dead ahead, cutting through the plaza. Visual confirmed. Vesti's soft voice came over the comms. It's a patrol. 8 rapture grunts, ground type. 2 flyers. And oh no. Commander, there's a heavy defender type. A shield weaver. Izuku zoomed his optical feed. Through the dust, the monstrous shapes of the raptures materialized. They were grotesque amalgams of sleek, alien metal and glowing crimson optics. The grunts looked like mechanical hounds, sleek and deadly. The flyers hovered above them like jagged metal stingrays. But the shield weaver was the real threat. It was a hulking, crab-like behemoth, projecting a shimmering, translucent energy barrier that covered the entire patrol. They've spotted us, Anise yelled, raising her grenade launcher. The raptures let out a collective, digitized screech that chilled Izuku to the bone. The grunts surged forward, their metallic claws tearing up the asphalt. The flyers banked high, charging their plasma cannons. A standard ARC commander would have done one of 2 things: ordered an immediate retreat, or screamed for the Nikke to simply focus fire on the heavy unit and pray their armor held out. Izuku Midoriya did neither. As the adrenaline flooded his system, time seemed to dilate. The crippling fear and physical nausea evaporated, completely eclipsed by the sheer, processing power of his hyper-analytical mind. He didn't see terrifying monsters. He saw vectors, firing arcs, cooldown timers, and geometric angles. He keyed his microphone, and the mutter storm was unleashed. Enemy patrol is utilizing a standard phalanx maneuver. Izuku's voice exploded over the comms, incredibly fast but perfectly articulated. The shield weaver's barrier is kinetic resistant but has a refresh delay of 1.2 seconds when subjected to explosive thermal shock. The grunts are moving in a synchronized pack, which means their pathing algorithm is slave to the defender's pace. If we stop the defender, we bottleneck the grunts. Anise blinked, pausing with her finger on the trigger. Wait, what? Midoriya, speak English, Drake. Izuku commanded, completely ignoring Anise's confusion, his brain moving 10 steps ahead. The flyers are banking left to flank the rover. Do not shoot the grunts. Aim your scattershot at the rubble of the building to your immediate right. 3-round burst. I shall destroy the building. A true act of vandalism. Drake laughed, pivoting sharply. She didn't question the bizarre order. She leveled her shotgun at the decaying pillars of a ruined bank and pulled the trigger. Boom! 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 The massive, concentrated force of her shotgun blasts shattered the reinforced concrete. Tons of rubble and rebar rained down into the street, creating an instantaneous, impenetrable barricade that completely blocked the rapture grunt's right side path. Perfect! Izuku muttered rapidly, his eyes flying across the radar. You just forced their pathing algorithm to recalculate. They have to funnel left. Anise! The grunts are clustering into the choke point. Do not aim for the bodies. Fire a concussive round directly at the asphalt beneath the shield weaver's front treads. Anise grit her teeth. Trusting you, kid! She aimed low, adjusting her firing arc, and pulled the trigger. The grenade arced through the air, completely bypassing the heavy energy shield because it didn't hit the rapture, it hit the ground underneath it. The explosion ripped the asphalt apart, creating a crater. The massive, heavy shield weaver pitched forward into the hole, its heavy chassis momentarily destabilized. The shield is flickering. Thermal shock application window is open. Izuku yelled, his voice cracking with intensity. Vesti! Now! Full burst. Elevation 45 degrees sweep from back to front. From her perch on the monorail, Vesti took a deep breath. She didn't hesitate. She didn't shake. She trusted the voice in her ear. She loaded the first rocket, feeling the slick, cold coating of the cryogel on the casing. She pulled the trigger. The rocket screamed down from the heavens, impacting the struggling shield weaver dead center. The explosion was colossal, a blooming flower of fire and shrapnel. The energy shield shattered like glass, but Vesti wasn't done. Just as Izuku had predicted, the cryogel absorbed the immense heat of the chamber. The mechanism didn't jam. It cycled with buttery smoothness. Thump, 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 thump. She unleashed a relentless, devastating barrage. She didn't even have to aim precisely. The grunts had been clustered together by Drake's rubble and pinned by Anise's crater. It was a fish-in-a-barrel scenario. The rockets rained down in a perfect, sweeping line, utterly obliterating the grunts in a chain of catastrophic secondary explosions. "The flyers!" Anise shouted, looking up through the smoke. The two hovering raptures had bypassed the slaughter, their plasma cannons glowing bright blue, aiming directly for Izuku's unprotected rover. "Drake! Pendulum sweep!" Izuku ordered, not even flinching as the plasma cannons charged. Mwahaha! A blur of white, black, and silver launched off the rubble. Drake utilized the kinetic recoil of her own shotgun blasts to propel herself through the air. She intercepted the flyers mid-flight, swinging her weapon like a bat, smashing the first flyer's chassis to pieces before pressing the barrel against the second flyer's optic sensor. "Eat villainy!" She pulled the trigger. The flyer exploded into a shower of sparks and falling metal. Drake landed gracefully on the hood of Izuku's rover in a crouch, her cape settling around her. Total silence returned to the ruined streets. The battle was over. Izuku slumped back into his chair, his hands finally dropping from the console. His heart was beating so fast he thought it might crack his ribs. He was drenched in sweat, his breathing ragged. Anise walked slowly toward the rover, her grenade launcher lowered. She looked at the smoldering crater where the Rapture patrol used to be. Then, she looked up at Vesti, who was standing tall on the monorail, staring at her own weapon in pure, unadulterated shock. "Zero jams," Vesti thought, her eyes wide. "Not a single jam. I did it." Anise turned her gaze to Izuku. The kid looked half dead from the atmospheric strain, his unenhanced body pushed to its absolute limits just by being on the surface. But his eyes were bright, burning with an emerald fire, already scanning the radar for the next threat. He hadn't fired a single bullet. He didn't have enhanced reflexes or titanium bones. But Anise realized, with a profound sense of awe, that Izuku Midoriya was the deadliest weapon on the battlefield. He didn't command them from afar. He fought through them. He had turned a chaotic, terrifying skirmish into a perfectly choreographed dance of destruction. Duration of engagement. Izuku panted, checking the timer on his console. 42 seconds. 0 casualties. 0 armor degradation. Ammo expenditure. 30% below optimal projections. That was perfect, guys. You were all amazing. Drake stood up on the hood of the rover, striking a triumphant pose. Ha! Of course it was perfect. My malevolent destruction of public property paved the way for our glorious victory. I am truly a mastermind of evil. You literally just followed his instructions to the letter, Drake, Anise deadpanned. I humored his suggestions to further my own dark agenda. Drake countered loudly, pointing at Anise. Vesti dropped down from the monorail, landing lightly next to the rover. She ran up to Izuku's window, her face flushed with excitement, entirely forgetting her usual timidness. "Commander! The gel! It worked! I fired 5 rockets in 3 seconds, and the heat sink didn't even trigger the warning light. It was amazing!" Izuku smiled, a genuine, exhausted, but incredibly happy smile. He reached out of the window and offered Vesti a thumbs up. "I knew you could do it, Vesti. Your output is incredible when your hardware can keep up with you." Anise leaned against the door of the rover. She looked at Izuku for a long moment. The cynicism, the walls, the distrust, they didn't vanish entirely, but they cracked wide open. 42 seconds, Anise murmured softly, almost to herself. A standard squad would have taken 5 minutes and lost at least a limb against a shielded patrol. She met Izuku's eyes. You weren't bluffing back at the outpost, were you? That whole hero analysis thing. You actually see the battlefield like a chessboard. I just pay attention to the details, Izuku said modestly, wiping sweat from his brow. You guys are the ones pulling the triggers and taking the risks. I just want to make sure your paths are clear. Well, Anise said, a genuine smirk finally gracing her lips. I gotta admit, Commander. It's nice not being the one taking shrapnel to the face for a change. Whatever this plus ultra thing is, I think I like it. Izuku's smile widened. He tapped his console, bringing up the navigation waypoint. Don't celebrate just yet, Izuku said, shifting back into command mode. That was just a scout patrol. The down transport is still 2 clicks away. If there are grunts here, it means there's a tyrant class controlling the sector somewhere nearby. We need to grab that data drive and get out before we draw the big guns. Let them come! Drake laughed, racking her shotgun. They shall know the terror of Squad Vanguard. As the squad reformed and moved deeper into the ruins, Izuku kept his eyes glued to the scanners. His body ached, his head pounded, and the toxic air of the surface tasted like pennies and ash. But as he watched Anise, Drake, and Vesti move with newfound synergy and confidence, a powerful warmth bloomed in his chest. He was quirkless. He was fragile, but he was a commander. He was their hero. And he was going to bring them all home.